Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 8. We are officially, I guess math-wise, about a third of the way through the season, and a lot of games that are of major interest this weekend. We'll get to them in great detail. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, I looked at the Dolphins injury report going into this weekend's game against the New England Patriots. I was thrilled that you were not listed as questionable or doubtful for this very real professional football podcast.
You asked me about one game on Monday for the look ahead and where I thought that might go. Injury report, not great. So we'll see what transpires. But since the last time we discussed that game, about a 1.5 move from a double-digit favorite down through the key and an 8.5 consensus. We'll see what happens with Mostert and Tyreek. Tyreek usually plays through a lot of this stuff, and big division game, so we'll see what unfolds there.
I mean, look, the Patriots make life difficult on Tyreek, so maybe he's taking the week off, getting himself focused on Oktoberfest and traveling over to Germany for the massive showdown a week from Sunday against the Kansas City Chiefs. But the Dolphins, unfortunately, not cracking the big game breakdowns on today's show. Before we get into some of the games that we do have on the docket, wanted to get your quick 2-minute thoughts on what we saw transpire on Monday, keeping in mind that 49ers Bengals part of the deep dive, and we may have a little bit more to say on the Minnesota Vikings in the grand scheme of things.
Well, the first thing is we should have gave out under 44 as a best bet. That was the
yeah, stone cold.
One thing we should have done.
Stone cold nuts the way that played out, right? First half under, full game. Good God.
So the first thing is like kudos to Kirk Cousins, because I think he's just a good dude. I think he catches a lot of flack, and he's starting to dispel the whole primetime notion. He was fantastic on Monday night, kind of willing a receiver group there without Justin Jefferson. In saying that, the 49ers were a net positive 11% in success rate. You had the Christian McCaffrey fumble inside the 15-yard line, and then you had a lapse in judgment from defensive coordinator Steve Wilkes with the zero blitz, and then on top of that, right, kind of the whole create your own luck kind of thing in life. The zero blitz, not a good idea. And then all of a sudden, Kirk Cousins plants one in the chest of cornerback Travarius Ward, but Addison did a great job stealing that away from him and getting the momentum score before halftime. So you had some swing plays certainly go in Minnesota's direction on top of fantastic play from Kirk Cousins, and ultimately it led to an upset.
There is no doubt the age-old, as you like to call it, the 1994 handicap paid dividends there with the Vikings as a home dog. Season
They're
hanging.
winning this year. I mean, I got to tell you, we just go through the board, the old 2-minute handicap, spend the next 4 days at the beach instead of we've done other things that haven't been quite as efficient.
Well, you know what? The good thing is it is a long season, still plenty of time to turn it all around and get back to some of the basics in the grand scheme of it. Thursday night, though, an interesting matchup that we'll have on tap later this evening. It's the Bucs on a short week traveling out of conference to Western New York to take on the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo, very interesting when you look at the way this number has gone, got as low as, in that 8 range where it opened. We're now seeing a prominent shop out west at 10, but the consensus more or less between 9.5. Total in this game bet down as low as 41.5 when there were questions about Baker Mayfield's availability. We're now sitting in that 43.5 range. Both teams enter this game in 7th place in their respective conference. You talked about how Tampa was a little bit of fool's gold. We're trying to identify opportunities to bet against them. Well, they failed ATS-wise each of the last 2 weeks against the Detroit Lions and last week in the division against the Atlanta Falcons at home. Meanwhile, Buffalo looking to rebound, losing outright in New England as more than a touchdown favorite. The Bills, interestingly enough, and we've talked about this in great detail, 8 and 12 in one-score games over the last 3 seasons. And when there's games that are lopsided, they're 22-2 in those contests. The problem for the Bills is they've led for a grand total of 9 minutes and 53 seconds over their last 3 games. And we've seen the offense tick down. We've seen the defense struggle with injuries. In comes a Bucs team just 1-3 since starting the season, 2-0. Signs point to Baker Mayfield and Chris Godwin being out there. Vita Vea, a true game time decision, according to Tom Pelissero's report earlier this morning. Payne, when you look to try and identify an angle worth exploiting in this matchup, are you more interested to see how the Bucs offense fares against a banged-up Bills defense, or what Josh Allen and company can do against the Tampa Bay defense that has been great when it comes to a points per game standpoint, but you dig into some of those underlying numbers, they're giving up yards in chunks. They just haven't had to pay for it on the scoreboard just yet.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think it's more interesting to talk about Josh Allen or Baker Mayfield as a quarterback? So it's kind of...
I'm going to go with Josh Allen. I'm going to trust my gut on this one.
Yeah, and I think, this is not just to do with tonight, but possibly what's going to transpire moving forward this season, kind of dive into what's been transpiring behind the scenes in the last couple of weeks. And I kind of go back to what we discussed in our Bills preseason preview. And we said if Sean McDermott felt the need to be overly involved with the offense and dictate terms to make his defense look better,
it's happening.
That could be the one thing that would derail the Bills season. And you're perfectly right. Like that's what we're watching unfold here in the last couple of weeks. And I don't know if you caught this or not. I know you do a lot of reading and keep in tune with player and coaching interviews. But Ken Dorsey had an interview this week, and he was asked about Sean McDermott's involvement in the Bills offense. And Dorsey's response was 45 seconds of awkward. There must have been no less than 20 and ahs. But Dorsey divulged that McDermott absolutely has an input and an involvement in the offensive game plan.
See, Payne, that's where Ken Dorsey has to come to the school of corporate Todd. I can coach him up for those uncomfortable moments by saying a lot when you're actually saying nothing to deflect, because to your point, you watch that interview and whew, it was not comfortable.
And he went on to say that, McDermott has a philosophical idea of what he wants, and that continues to blend with the Bills' offense. You're seeing 3 clear changes to the Bills' offense right now, with McDermott kind of finger fucking the offense, so to speak.
Thanks for that visual, by the way.
Well, yeah, it's really bad. I mean, if you look at pace, the Bills have gone from 7th to 30th. The Bills are passing the ball just 2% over expectation this season. Last year, it was over 6%. And then the most efficient running play in all of football, right? Quarterback runs, designed or impromptu. They've all but gone away. I mean, Josh Allen was averaging a shade less than 11 runs per game last season, a shade over 4 per game this season. You look at the last 3 games, and it kind of coincides with what? When the Bills' defense is starting to get a little bit dinged up and McDermott needs a little bit more assurance on that side of the ball, the Bills' offense is trending even worse from a script and game plan perspective. And it's very clear it correlates with the Bills' defense becoming increasingly injured. But right now, the Bills are 26th in EPA per play over the last 3 weeks. You're looking at the offenses that are worse. Only Matt Canada, Sam Howell, Jordan Love, Mac Jones, Joshua Dobbs, and Zach Wilson are either calling or operating worse offenses over this 3-week stretch than Buffalo. And it's mind-boggling to think about that. I don't know if it's going to get fixed on a short week. It actually might be a blessing in disguise. And I hate this for him, the player, the person, but it might be a blessing in disguise that Dawson Knox went down. I would assume that's going to mean more 3 wide receiver sets for Buffalo, something that really hasn't been common this year. Buffalo's actually thrown from 11 at the 3rd lowest rate in the league, but spreading out the Buccaneers defense that has been torched back-to-back weeks at home by Desmond Ridder and Jared Goff probably should be like a signal to McDermott and Dorsey. This needs to be a pass-heavy game plan. The Bucs are dead last in EPA per dropback allowed the last 2 weeks. Over 57% of passes have graded successful. If you look on the season, and I think you hit this perfectly in saying that scoring defense looks good, but if you strip out turnovers, of which the Bucs have accumulated a ton, They're a bottom third of the league defense in EPA per play allowed. And I know Josh Allen struggled last week against Belichick's blitz. And, Bowles is going to watch that game film. And we know he already loves to dial up pressure, right? 4th highest blitz rate in the league. I don't know if it's going to necessarily work here, right? It worked last week, but if you look at the season, Josh Allen's graded out 5th best QB when blitzed. And it's kind of forced him to go to his best weapon in Stephon Diggs. He has a 38% target share when Josh Allen's blitzed. Those two just seem, I know we see some sideline antics every now and then, but everything they say, like they love each other. That's how they kind of interact. And it's very clear on the field they have a very good rapport. If Buffalo doesn't find success tonight, though, Todd,
you hit the panic button.
You do. And I think at that point, Ken Dorsey needs to grow a pair of balls, take back the offense, make it his. And if that means losing his job at some point down the line, at least he'll be able to tell other organizations why during interviews. And this was the conflict that was going on behind the scenes that Buffalo Bills fans didn't want to hear about last year between Daboll and McDermott. And Daboll was kowtowing down a little bit, but it was still his offense. He was still pushing back. He was still doing a lot of the things that he wanted to do, and it led to a very contentious relationship the back half of last season.
You mentioned the interview with Dorsey, and I wanted to do some digging after I watched that clip to see if there was anything out there that McDermott had said to kind of corroborate Ken Dorsey more or less minding his P's and Q's, and I found one line that was extremely fascinating and pretty telling, Payne. So in relation, when he was asked by a reporter about what McDermott was doing with this team, and this is a direct quote, "I'm doing everything that I can as a head coach to make sure that things are the way that I want them and expect them to be across all 3 phases." So you want to talk about a head coach who wants to be a control freak, a megalomaniac, and all of that. Look, your defense right now stinks. Your offense should be the unit that you're protecting. Go out there, build a lead, and allow this defense to pin its ears back and come after the quarterback with Greg Russo and AJ Epinesa. If you're playing in a neutral game state, that does Buffalo no favors when you can't stop the run, you can't get off the field on 3rd down. But one other thing I want to add on this Bucs defense as well, when you look at how they have performed this year, one of the stats that I always find fascinating is yards per point, because I think it can lie from time to time. And over the last 4 games that the Bucs have played, they've given up more than 380 yards, while they have the 6th best scoring defense in the league, allowing just 36 points the last 2 weeks. That's 22 yards per point. Their season average is a league best 19.8 yards per point. League average is more in that 15.5, 16 range. If there is any semblance of regression here, Buffalo should absolutely feast for all the reasons that you outlined. Getting Diggs involved, opening up opportunities for Gabe Davis, who should have a huge matchup edge in terms of stretching the field against Jamel Dean. And maybe this is the Unleash Kincaid game that we were looking for, as we got glimpses of what he could be. And Billy had kind of talked about it to us that, hey, Kincaid is the X factor for this offense. So let's see if Buffalo can hum on all cylinders with just 3 days of prep.
I think that's the problem with that old school mindset. You're really seeing a shift in coaching, right? You're watching across the board, whether it's high school, college, or the NFL, a lot of young guys getting integrated, right? 30-something-year-olds, late 20s, at least getting on staffs, and they all grew up in the analytic era. And you still have like this changing of the guard that's still kind of being fought by some guys like McDermott who don't have an understanding that, hey, building leads with my offense is only going to help my defense. There's not that comprehension at this point. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater or have the sky falling, right? We've seen very sharp money on Buffalo, whether it be straight or teasers this week. And I do think there's still a real player in the AFC, but they have to start getting a little bit healthier, have to make a move or two at the deadline, have to make some internal adjustments offensively, and I think they'll be fine. But what's interesting is you mentioned Billy, and I was very surprised that he said this to me, but he's kind of out. He thinks this has a potential to be an abject disaster because he said, look at the ownership and what they've done to the Buffalo Sabres. He said the GM has moved on. Brian Daboll should have been promoted to head coach, and he wasn't. and McDermott's a defensive mind. Josh Allen, if you watch, he is not having fun anymore playing football. It looks like a chore to him.
Yep.
He thinks this is a sign of worse things to come down the line.
Look, we talk about the NFL all the time, that your window can close quickly if you let some of those opportunities slip through your fingers, and you wonder if Buffalo isn't able to make a deep run in the playoffs this year. It's got to be an AFC championship or bust. You know, what direction the Pagula family will look to go. And, of course, you mentioned the Sabres. They now have the longest postseason drought, I believe, in North America in terms of making the playoffs, and they haven't exactly started out like a house on fire so far this season. But from Thursday into Sunday, Payne, and we may as well start with the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've seen the Jags take early money this week along with some over money on top of that. Jacksonville opened up as a 1.5-point favorite, now up to 2.5, heavily juiced, trending towards the 3, the total leaking from 41.5 to 42. As far as the Steelers are concerned, this is where, if you're a fan of the black and gold, you may want to cover your ears, because nothing I'm going to say to introduce this game is all that pleasant, but it's things you know all too well with Matt Canada. The Steelers are just one of two teams that have been outgained in every contest this season. The company they keep in that category is with the 1-6 Arizona Cardinals. The Steelers are 4-0 in one-score games this year. That's great, but we know regression always lurks. They've won 7 straight games that have been decided by one score. It's tied for the longest streak in team history, going back to 91-92. Now, the one vote of confidence there is Mike Tomlin has excelled in these kind of spots, but they're the 5th team since 1970 with a winning record through 6 games despite being outgained in each game. All 4 previous teams failed to win a playoff game. They're the 10th team with a minus 400 or worse yardage margin, but winning record through the first 6 games since 1970. And it's deja vu all over again, because the Steelers were outgained in each of the first 8 contests last year. In steps a Jaguars team, extra time to prepare, and Trevor Lawrence has had some success while at Clemson against Kenny Pickett. His Tigers teams outscored Kenny's Panthers 94-27. Payne, when you look at this matchup, we talk about the Steelers and fairy dust all the time. Last week, Steelers fans want to sell you a bill of goods that they figured it out offensively with that fourth quarter explosion. Having Deontay Johnson back obviously helps some, but again, it's a game-changing play from their defense. TJ Watt creating the short field to start the second half that allowed the Steelers to play from a neutral game state. How do you go about assessing either side of the ball? We can take it with your lead before we get into both sides.
Yeah, let's just start right there with the Steelers offense, because I think it's extremely straightforward. When I look at this matchup, well, first, I agree with you. I don't think all of the world's problems were solved last week with the Steelers offense. I still look at them and I just kind of scratch my head with the things that Matt Canada does. And it was a very slow start, to your point, which isn't what you want to see coming out of a bye. There wasn't anything that was overly, ooh, that changed. Oh, adjustment there.
Did you see Tomlin's comment on that? He said he wanted to take the ball out of the bye to protect his defense. Had no idea going 3 and out like they do every single game was a way to protect your defense.
Yeah, I mean, look, Pittsburgh right now, and those comments illustrate what I'm about to say. Like, Pittsburgh throws the ball at a rate 4% below expectation. This just feels like a spot, though, where Kenny Pickett's going to be relied upon more than usual, because the Jaguars' defense has stopped the run extremely well, right? I mean, 6th best in schedule-adjusted defensive rush efficiency, 3rd best in rushing success rate allowed, and now all of a sudden you start to look at the injury report, and Davon Hamilton, the big fella inside for Jacksonville, is practiced in full on a Wednesday. So I feel like he's going to be in the mix this week. Matt Canada has basically refused to stop the inefficient runs with Najee Harris, and so 28th in rushing efficiency as a team because of that. So it just doesn't seem like Pittsburgh's going to have much success on the ground, and that's going to put Kenny Pickett in a lot of these unfavorable long down situations. I also don't know, kind of hearkening back to what we said at the top, like, what was the improvement last week from the Steelers offense? Maybe there was some late.
Getting Deontay Johnson back, that was about it.
Yeah, I'm leaning more towards it being a byproduct of facing a Rams defense that's starting to settle in more towards their preseason projection than what the first month performance actually was. But to your point, like, it helps getting Deontay Johnson back. He's the best route runner Pittsburgh has. If you look last week, he was very helpful in beating some of those off-man zone coverages, averaged 3.3 yards per route run. But he also opens things up for George Pickens. So defenses just can't focus their attention on only Pickens now. But I think when I look at this, and part of the reason why we've seen Jacksonville money enter the market to start the week is this is a huge step down in class for Jacksonville's defense. I mean, Jacksonville's faced the third toughest schedule of offenses to date this season. Now you get number 26 Pittsburgh. Tyson Campbell also got a limited practice in on Wednesday. Let's monitor that. That'd be a huge get back for the Jaguar secondary. But I don't see a massive path here unless Kenny Pickett has a great day through the air.
I mean, you can look at some of these numbers and they don't lie for the Steelers. It's now 54 straight games and counting where they've accumulated less than 400 total yards of offense, the longest streak in the league since the Arizona Cardinals accomplished a similar feat back in 2010 to 2013. They went into SoFi Stadium last weekend with five offensive touchdowns all season, and they had a robust 110 yards of offense before they got the explosion. Now, Kenny has masked some of that when you look at how he's performed in the fourth quarter with a passer rating north of 120, his clutch rating, all of those things. That's great in theory when you're within striking distance, but when you're not, it's a little bit more problematic. And in steps a Jacksonville offense that should have a healthier Trevor Lawrence. He said he's going to wear the brace again this week, and he prides himself on making sure that availability is one of the most valuable attributes he can provide. The Steelers have to generate pressure because this secondary leaves a lot to be desired. Now, maybe they see modest improvement as the season progresses. We saw Joey Porter Jr. get more involved. It looks like Patrick Peterson is sliding to a safety role, which is probably a good thing since he's been a liability in coverage for the last couple of seasons. But Lawrence gets the ball out of his hand quickly. Could negate some of the advantage that the Steelers want to create with TJ Watt and Alonzo Highsmith. Travis Etienne, a bell cow back, and you look at what Christian Kirk has done, absolutely crushing teams when operating from the slot. Payne, I asked this question because it sounds ridiculous because people always think the Steelers have this great elite defense. You pointed it out last year. They couldn't stop the run, and for stretches they couldn't stop the pass. Is there a path to success for the Steelers to slow down Jacksonville if Press Taylor and Doug Peterson get in their bag with a few extra days to prep for this road matchup?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but those few extra days are certainly important for a great offensive mind like Doug Peterson, and then giving Sunshine a couple extra days for the knee. What's funny about that, though, is like, dude looks like an Herbal Essence hair model, but like he is actually tough as nails, right? I mean, make no bones about it. That dude is extremely tough. I think this side of the matchup almost mirrors our breakdown of Steelers-Rams last week. Now, I don't think it's as pronounced for Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence, but he's been a little bit of a different quarterback when either blitzed or pressured. And that's exactly what the Steelers' defense is dependent upon, right? The Steelers' defense is drastically different when they don't get pressure. If you look in totality again, last week, it really showed the same thing with Matthew Stafford. But when the Steelers don't get pressure, it's a bottom 5 pass defense. When they do get pressure, it's a top 5 pass defense. And the vast majority of like the Steelers' pressure creation, so to speak, is manufactured and not natural. So Pittsburgh has to blitz. They're blitzing at the 5th highest rate in the NFL through 7 weeks. Trevor Lawrence has graded out QB 8 when he's not blitzed. But when teams have sent heat, Lawrence is below average in EPA per dropback. So it's something to look at there. Even when Lawrence faces any kind of pressure, the turnover-worthy play rate has more than doubled when he's kept clean. The adjusted accuracy dips over 21 points. I think the positive here, though, when we're thinking about pressure in this matchup, which obviously leads to a ton of variance, offensive line for Jacksonville is quietly coming together.
Great point.
Cam Robinson has been sensational in pass protection since returning from his suspension. Brandon Scherf is healthy after the early season ankle scare, and he's playing extremely well. You're starting to see flashes of good, right, from the rookie Anton Harrison in pass protection. Now, the lows are low, but the highs have been pretty damn good. Those three have really helped kind of alleviate some of the pressure on the center, Luke Fortner, and you can see that in the numbers. With those guys back and healthy, Foreigner's delivered his best 2 games of the season in pass protection back-to-back weeks. And then one thing to monitor, Walker Little got a limited in on Wednesday after missing the last 2 games. He's going to kick back in at guard next to Cam Robinson when he returns. So suddenly, your front 5 looks pretty fortified there. If Trevor Lawrence has time, you hit it perfectly in that Christian Kirk should do quite well here. Kirk lives in the slot on 72% of his pass snaps, and he crushes man coverage. The Steelers play a fringe top 5 rate of man coverage, and they have issues defending the slot. I think maybe that's part of the move for Patrick Peterson kind of into the middle of the field this week, is to negate some of that. Jacksonville typically doesn't rely on its ground game, but just matchup-wise and metrically, to your point, the Steelers haven't been overly stout stopping the run either, so Jacksonville might have a sprinkle of success on the ground to go with some nice matchups through the air.
The Jags ever going to get Zay Jones back and healthy, or given the fact that their division gives them a little bit of a luxury, they're going to err on the side of caution and allow him to rest that knee so he can become 100% when they need him most?
That's what it feels like. I think maybe we all got a little too cute navigating that division as it's playing out.
Hey, look, every now and again you try and be the smartest guy in the room, and sometimes it doesn't quite pay off. I mean, Jacksonville reminding us how talented they are. They endured some bumps and bruises along the way, but starting to show that they want to be in that second tier among some of the AFC teams. If they solidify that back end in terms of their secondary, Trevor Lawrence continues to emerge, and the offensive line becomes a strength, like you highlighted. There is no doubt Doug Peterson and company could be playing football deep into the month of January, with a lot to be said. When you look at how good they've been since they started their winning streak last year, the only team that they haven't been able to really handle has been the Kansas City Chiefs. And trust me, there are a lot of teams in the NFL that can't deal with the Chiefs on a week-in, week-out basis. You can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board related, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod and subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter delivered right to your inbox every single Friday. It's a reminder about all the shows, the articles, and the best bets you may have missed. Our player props have been absolutely electric, and it's rare, Payne. You can cash a ticket in the NFL where a running back prop doesn't get a single touch. He's out there on special teams, but that's exactly where you led listeners with Keontae Ingram, longest rush under 12.5 yards last week.
Yeah, I think we did a good job identifying another winner for the newsletter. It's always a little great when you can go under a rushing number and the gentleman doesn't receive an actual attempt. So don't know if we're going to do as well this week, but we will have something delivered to the listeners' inbox sometime Friday.
Typically challenging to find props that cash with a true no-sweat component. Into the late slate on Sunday, which sees the Cleveland Browns going out to the Pacific Northwest to take on the Seattle Seahawks. Of course, the Browns will have a change under center. They wasted no time naming P.J. Walker the starter for this weekend. As a result, you saw under money come in almost immediately. 41.5 down to 38, and the Seahawks have moved from a 2-point favorite, 2.5 where it opened, through the key number of 3 out to 3.5. And when we look at this Browns team, they've now won 2 straight games by a grand total of 3 points, a 19-17 win against the 49ers, and a 39-38 thriller against the Indianapolis Colts. They're looking for their first 5-2 start since 2020. That season marks the only times the Browns have started 5-2 or better since they became an NFL franchise the second time around back in 1999. The problem for the Browns is they're dealing with a lot of off-field distractions. Questions have surfaced about Watson's actual desire to play, Stefanski's handling of an increasingly strange situation, and the clarity of communication between player and coach. Reminds me all the time of the age-old question, are you hurt or are you injured? And the Browns came under scrutiny a couple of years ago with Baker Mayfield when he fought through an injury, and we saw a major dip in his performance. Meanwhile, the Seattle Seahawks, a very
Darnell Jefferson, by the way, didn't have 230 million reasons to get out there and play.
I don't know. He did play at ESU, and we know what school that resembles, so we're not quite sure how much money made it to an unmarked bank account somewhere in the Cayman Islands to try and get him to ESU and allow him to lead the Timberwolves to a very successful season.
No doubt about it.
As far as the Seahawks are concerned, they weren't exactly dominant. A 20-10 win against the Arizona Cardinals last week. When you look at these two teams, they've lined people's wallets when you've gone under the total. The Browns now on a 9-3-1 run under the total the last 13 games. The Seahawks, 8 of their last 10 have also come in under the total. Rather than speculate on how PJ Walker will fare against an underrated Seahawks defense, Payne, I think it's more interesting if we look at the Seahawks offense and how they'll do against one of the top-rated units in the league, the Cleveland Browns, knowing that the Seahawks offense will go from playing one of the worst defenses in Arizona last week to arguably two of the best in Cleveland and Baltimore over the next 2 games. When we look at Geno's performances, yes, he played without DK Metcalf. Sure, we saw Jackson Smith and Jigba off the milk carton onto the stat sheet with 4 catches for 60+ and his first career NFL touchdown. But this doesn't seem like a favorable matchup for Seattle offensively against the Browns' defensive front.
So, very sharp money you mentioned came in Monday off the screen at 40. It never ticked below that until the announcement of Deshaun Watson being out. And so now we're at 38 with PJ Walker. Extremely difficult matchup for PJ Walker, and we absolutely know what he is. And at this point, he's one of the worst quarterbacks to ever play NFL football.
Temple could use him now, though, I'll tell you that much.
They could. And so I thought Cleveland to be a very savvy, buttoned-up analytical organization, but they have now doled out some interesting contracts to quarterbacks because they re-upped PJ Walker. And there was some chatter about potentially going with DTR earlier in the week. That doesn't seem to be coming to fruition in a tough spot on the road in a hostile environment against a defense that is absolutely trending well. I think we're one of the very few that thought Seattle's defense was going to be improved this year, and now all of a sudden, the last couple weeks, like they're really starting to trend in the right direction. But I think, to your point, like the other side of the ball is more interesting to discuss, and that is partly why this under was hit. It wasn't just PJ Walker related, but the Browns defense came out last week a little bit shell-shocked. They gave up some gashers to the Colts in Gardner Minshew, and I think it was more stylistically and why they had some struggles in terms of giving up some explosives. I think this is a much better matchup stylistically for the Browns defense than last week. They should have the edge up front. Seahawks are still lacking in that department, certainly battled injuries along the offensive line this season, and their O-line coach has done great mixing and matching pieces, and I think they've played well above expectation, especially when you consider the injuries. But, I mean, Seattle's not getting that ground game going, right? They're 19th in rushing efficiency. The Browns defense, number 2 in rushing efficiency. Cleveland's only allowed 32% of runs to grade successful, so it feels like this is going to be a Geno Smith game. Feels like Seattle is kind of understanding that now. They've become a pass-first offense, back-to-back seasons, top 10 in pass rate over expectation. And, kudos to Pete for kind of allowing that to happen because he's been the guy that has wanted to force-feed the run game over the last couple of years. But you're looking right now, the Browns' defense is number 1 in pass rush win rate. And so you have this element of, hey, we're not really running it overly efficiently. We're letting Geno pass it a little bit more. Now we're facing a defense that's number 1 in this pass rush win rate. And when Geno is being pressured this season, he's nearing a 6% turnover-worthy play rate. So not overly positive. The other interesting element this week is the style of defense Jim Schwartz plays. It's gobs of man. The Browns lead the league in man coverage usage. And that has been Geno Smith's Achilles heel. Out of 38 qualifying quarterbacks, you're looking at number 35 in EPA per dropback against man coverage for Geno Smith. Now, I think it does help that DK Metcalf logged a full practice on Wednesday. It's a positive sign. So that is trending in the right direction. I would make sure you look at today's injury report. A lot of times, guys try to give it a full go through injury just to see how the body feels the next day. So I think today's really important. But if he's back, that is huge, getting a big body receiver like Metcalf. When you think about what the Browns are trouting out at corner, right? It's 2 5'11", 190-pound guys and Ward and Newsome. Maybe that helps Geno's performance against man coverage a touch this week. This matchup also has a pretty large delta in terms of schedule strength. The Browns defense, they faced a top 8 schedule of offenses through 7 weeks. Seattle's offense, they faced a bottom 5 schedule of defenses, and now you're getting number 1 Cleveland. So to me, Seattle's offense should be really tested here if P.J. Walker doesn't give the game away and set up short fields for Seattle's offense or put the game in a state where Geno really isn't forced to do much.
It's interesting because you mentioned Seattle, and we've grown accustomed to Pete overdrafting running backs, staying committed to those backs through thick and thin, and to see him make the change knowing the strengths of this team has been interesting, that you can teach an old dog some new tricks. Did want to ask you one last question on Seattle offensively, Payne. When you look at the offensive line, Abe Lucas remains on IR. They had a couple of players that are banged up, and Evan Brown and Phil Haynes. How have you looked at Seattle's offensive line, knowing that they are in the top half of the league in terms of pass block win rate and run block win rate, but to your point, haven't exactly faced a dynamic schedule of opposing defenses that can get after the quarterback and stop the run like the Browns can?
This is one of those first true tests, and I kind of gave a praise to their O-line coach, who has done a fantastic job mixing and matching parts and pieces, because guys have been in and out of the lineup all season long, and they are starting to trend just a little bit healthier, but that's a scary thing in this matchup, because I don't think Seattle's going to consistently establish that ground game down to down, and it's going to put Geno in some situations where he's going to face some heat. And now you're stepping up in class, as I alluded to. But that's the matchup to watch for sure up front.
And not a whole lot of wiggle room either for any of these teams in the AFC North, one of the most competitive divisions in football from top to bottom. And when we discuss the AFC North, we'd be remiss if we didn't hit on one of the other teams in that division who travels out west after a bye week to the Bay Area. For the Cincinnati Bengals, find themselves now 3.5-point underdogs against the San Francisco 49ers. Total on this game, 43.5. Of course, the big news on this game broke Wednesday, where Brock Purdy suffered a concussion at some point in the game Monday night against the Minnesota Vikings. His status for the contest on Sunday remains very much up in the air. If he's unable to go, Sam Darnold would be the heir apparent, marking yet another starting quarterback to take the reins for a Kyle Shanahan-led offense. And I think that changes the dynamic in and of itself. So that'll be the first most logical place to start, Payne. When we look at this handicap, Brock Purdy takes the number from 5.5 down to 3.5. We saw some books trend as low as 3. There are a couple threes that are heavily juiced out there in the market. What kind of adjustments should we be making for a quarterback that had elevated his level of play, had thrown his hat into the ring for possible MVP consideration, but we know San Francisco typically has been much more a byproduct of Shanahan's system than any single attribute for whatever quarterback that they put under center to lead the charge?
Candidly, you covered all the ground right there in the question. I think so far the market's reacted about 2.25 points, right? From the 49ers minus 5.5 down to like a juiced 3 or a soft 3.5. So in terms of its value, right, it's roughly 7%. So it's a material move. And that's just on Brock Purdy being downgraded to questionable on the screen, right? Don Best, whatever odd screen you use. Now, Adam Schefter, when reporting Purdy's concussion, kind of elaborated and said no player has been placed in the protocol and played the same week this season. And now you think about Brock Purdy having one less day to clear it, playing Monday night. I do think once Purdy officially gets announced out, if that's the case, on the screen, right, it's going to cause the market to dip lower. And here's the interesting part of this handicap. It's like, despite the massive rest edge for Cincinnati having come off the bye, right, and San Francisco being on a short week with some significant travel, especially the last 2 weeks, my understanding is there would be a bye in the 49ers at 2.5 if Trent Williams was able to play. So it'd be, the Sam Darnold, Trent Williams combination, if you had the ability to lay 2.5 or a very affordable money line, would kind of what I've been hearing brewing. I don't know if those situations unfold that way. I think you mentioned the potential downgrade. Is it too much? Is it warranted? I don't know. I think it's a great question. I actually dug into this not knowing you were going to ask it because I think it's a really interesting point. But if you look at the last 2 seasons, QBs with at least 75 dropbacks, Brock Purdy is number 4 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. Okay? So you kind of put that in the left side of your brain. Right side of your brain, think about Jimmy G from 2017 to 2022 during his tenure with Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers. quarterbacks over that stretch with at least 100 dropbacks. Garoppolo was QB3 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. So my point here is, and I think kind of where you were leading me and maybe your own mindset thought, like Kyle Shanahan's found a great fit for his offense in Brock Purdy like he did with Jimmy G. Brock is just younger. He's more athletic. He provides more mobility. There was the thought at the time that he provided more stability, right? Since then, the elbow injury, which is kind of fluky, right? And the concussion, kind of fluky. But Jimmy G was kind of going through a series of not being able to complete seasons. So to me, this is just as much about scheme as it is player. Now, the player has to at least have a baseline of competence and skill set, because we've seen, right? Nick Mullins has come in, CJ Beathard's come in for Shanahan, but in a one-game setting, Kyle Shanahan has done well with those kinds of backup quarterbacks, and I think Sam Darnold has more talent than the previous replacements. The problem is, and boy, like I hate to say this after a Cowboys bet a few weeks back against the 49ers got absolutely pummeled, but you're starting to see everything we discussed in the preseason and leading up to that Cowboys game come to fruition for the 49ers. We might have been too far ahead of the market, right? Very thin 49ers team. The key offensive players are so valuable because they're so unique. Debo goes down. You can't just replace him with another guy because his skill set is unmatched.
Yep.
You can't lose a guy on the offensive line because there's zero depth, and the vast majority of the current starters that are playing aren't very good. And now their best goes down with Trent Williams. The defense was sure as shit going to regress with a change in coordinator and like a drastic dip in depth along the defensive line, and the questions at corner past Javarius Ward's, right? Those are all starting to show themselves the last 14 plus days, and now in a short week, it faces like a healthy Bengals offense that's looking for a reset, after the bye here.
Well, and you mentioned when we broke down the NFC West that there was a little bit of a nibble from some of the sharpest bettors out there going under on San Francisco's wins at 11.5, not because of their starting 22, but because this is a league where things can go wrong and you need depth to be able to carry you through rough patches. And you look at what the 49ers have coming up after a game at home against the Bengals. I mean, they do get their bye week, so they could heal up, but you go to Jacksonville, you get Tampa at home, and then you go back-to-back at Seattle, at Philadelphia. Not exactly layups by any stretch of the imagination, but you also mentioned the Bengals offense, and I think a lot of people believe that this group is going to look like the 2021 Cincinnati Bengals or the 2022 edition because of what they saw from Joe Burrow leading into the bye week, but we talked about it in the wake of the 17-13 win against Seattle. The Bengals had two good drives in that game, and it was the defense that bailed them out because Geno Smith couldn't poke in from with multiple trips into the red zone. Are we led to believe that this Bengals offense, with a chance to hit the reset button, a healthier Joe Burrow, T. Higgins returning to action, is suddenly going to look like a high-flying attack, knowing that the Bengals, coming out of the bye week since 2021, have put together a record of 17-5 when they have a chance to hit that reset button in the middle of the season?
So this side just has so much variance. I hate to keep saying that, but like the first thing is, Nick Bosa came out, Fred Warner came out Monday in the post-game presser and took responsibility for the defensive performance against the Vikings. Within that, Bosa kind of subtly questioned some of Steve Wilkes' blitzes, right? and Kyle Shanahan did as well. I don't know if you've watched this. Specifically, Kyle Shanahan mentioned the blitz before the half that led to Jordan Addison's touchdown.
Oh, he didn't subtly question it. Yeah. Kyle Shanahan basically said Steve Wilkes more or less knew he fucked up.
Yeah. And so like it was a luck box. Right? I mean, Cousins basically hit Javarius Ward right in the chest, but there's enough issues going on with the 49ers defensively that all of the meeting times are changing this week to allow Kyle Shanahan to be part of the defensive meetings. And so I don't necessarily love that has to happen if you're thinking about backing the 49ers. But again, where the variance comes is like we've kind of always felt like the 49ers defense was a little less than market, right? Than a little lower than perception. And now all of a sudden you have Burrow and Higgins healthier. There could be a total reset off the bye, to your point, but it's something we haven't really seen this season either. So you're kind of attempting to make an assertion that might not be true. And that's what makes this a little bit nerve-wracking here. Now, the 49ers defense can be run on, as I mentioned, Monday night, 20th in schedule adjusted rush efficiency allowed. Is the Bengals offense good enough to take advantage in that area? I don't know. They're 22nd in rushing efficiency themselves. They really haven't figured out the running back rotation. Brown hasn't kind of fully emerged there as a rookie, and Mixon, I mean, maybe the week off helps him because, you start looking at some of his numbers metrically, not very good. He's trending lower and lower in terms of ability to create run after the contact.
He's the same running back he was last year. There was a reason that he took a pay cut and was happy to stay with the Bengals. He'd been trending poorly and been more a stat compiler than a model of efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, last year he had the picture-perfect component of running into like one of the league's lowest rates one of the league's highest rates of light boxes, and he still wasn't overly efficient. Now, he started this season pretty well, but again, like every single week, his ability to create yards after contact just continued to dwindle a little bit. But you think about Cincinnati, right? Like doled out over $100 million in O-line upgrades the last two off seasons. You got 2 weeks of rest versus a short week defensive front. Like Cincinnati got to win that trench battle. Other thing we noticed with Steve Wilkes' defense, and it goes back to not trusting, his guys to cover past Javarius Ward, is some off coverage. And you can't really do that against the Bengals until they show you otherwise. And you look at Burrow getting rid of the ball at the third fastest rate. He's also dead last in the NFL in completed air yards at 3.6. So, you're thinking Burrow is throwing it quick and short. The mindset will be, hey, like he's healthy now. That won't be the case. Maybe you're right. Maybe that is the change. Maybe that is the reset off the bye. But everyone thought Burrow was back to being 100% leading into the Seattle game after they saw, the performance the week before, kind of running around in the pocket and leapfrogging defenders, and right, everything was supposed to be perfect. And then Burrow released it quicker against the Seahawks compared to his season-long average. And Burrow wasn't pressured. 17% pressure rate on his dropbacks in that game. And his completed air yards were lower than his season-long average against Seattle. So I don't think the 49ers would be wise to start this game playing soft coverage. I want to see that reset. Let's see it. Beat me deep, right?
Yeah.
And Burrow just hasn't shown that ability, right? He's completing 32% of his throws 10-plus yards downfield. It's the lowest rate in the league. And then when you dig deeper, 39% of his completions, 10-plus yards, came in one game against the Cardinals' 31st ranked pass defense. So candidly, like, I think this game, to me, and maybe I'm wrong, it's been more of number grabs as opposed to like real positions. You got word at the Chris reopen, a very respected better grab 6. My feeling is on the announcement of Purdy potentially being officially out, we'll hear of buy orders on a cheaper 49ers money line or a well-priced 2.5 if it were to unfold that way with the line coming down and Trent Williams getting upgraded.
Can't argue that for a second. One other thing that I'm going to be interested to watch this week is a Bengals beat reporter named Charlie Goldsmith reported that Wednesday during practice, Joe Burrow spent more time working under center in his pre-practice routine, and maybe a new part of the program for a Bengals offense that could look to have a little bit more flexibility in their play calling with that being the case, because to your point, Joe Mixon has really struggled outside the top 30 from an efficiency standpoint. The Bengals have pretty much used shotgun to protect Burrow so he can get the ball out of his hands quickly. Let's see if that gets installed as early as Sunday, or that's something that they'll unveil a little bit further into the season, maybe not against the 49ers defense.
I read that and didn't bring it up because it just creates the extra level of variance that we just don't know. Because go back to last year. You remember their early season reset last year? It was the inverse. It was we were moving Burrow to shotgun because he was far more efficient from operating from shotgun. So now all of a sudden we're putting him under center. That didn't really work the first 4 or 5 weeks last year. What are we hoping that comes up with that?
Yeah, I think they're just trying to figure out how they can potentially provide more balance. I mean, this team, one of the worst rushing attacks in the league. And to your point, they're facing light boxes at a top 5 rate. You're not getting anything in terms of run after contact. So you have to figure something out. And it makes for a very fascinating game Sunday, knowing it's a 49ers team that returns home after back-to-back losses and what they'll be able to put on film and go out there and be able to execute. Thankfully, we have some intrigue there, Payne, because we are contractually obligated to talk talk about Sunday Night Football, although we really wanted to test if we needed to do so, given that we're going to be gifted a Chargers-Bears game on NBC to close out the Sunday slate. It's the Chargers, a massive favorite here, 8.5, 9-point chalk. Total in this game, 46.5, and full props to Tyson Bagent, can become the second undrafted rookie quarterback to start 2-0 since 1950. It happened back in 2019 where it was Duck Hodges going 3-0. The Chargers, they have been a model of mediocrity, an NFL high 12 losses by 3 or fewer points since 2020. And Payne, this Chargers defense has come under a ton of scrutiny, and rightfully so. What we saw in the first half from a defensive game plan standpoint against Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce should go down in the annals of being full-blown malpractice, playing zone and getting gash as Mahomes threw for 320 plus. In steps a Bears offense that isn't going to stretch the field vertically. You look at the underlying metrics that Bagent put forth, it was point and click offensively. They were able to operate from either a neutral or positive game state. This Bears offense better be able to hum, because I have to imagine the Chargers offense will be looking for a breakout performance after being held scoreless in the second half in 2 out of the last 3 games.
Yeah, I mean, the Chargers offense has not been humming themselves, but certainly a step down in class a little bit there against a Bears defense. But I think when we kind of focus in on the side of the ball that probably has the larger impact, kudos to the Bears, right? I mean, the offense is starting to find an identity the last 4 games. Looks like the 5 up front are getting situated and settled into their roles. I actually loved seeing Chicago make the adjustment last week, and they paired their 2 early round picks back-to-back years, Jenkins Wright, on the same side to try and negate Max Crosby as best they could. Now, the recent offensive production for Chicago has come against defenses that have an average efficiency rank of 25th. Now, the Chargers are kind of on par with that, so it's not like the Bears offense is stepping up in class, but we do now have 6 quarters of Tyler Bagent on tape. We know how the Raiders elect to defend, and they allowed Bagent to kind of just dink and dunk the Bears offense down the field, made his job extremely easy. 31% of Bagent's passes were behind the line of scrimmage last week. 42% came between 0 and 9 yards. 2.1 air yards per attempt for Bagent last week. He also had a complimentary ground game, right? The Raiders are 28th in defensive rush efficiency, so they couldn't stop Freeman and those guys. And so now I don't think much of Brandon Staley. His defense has been obviously wildly disappointing for 3 straight seasons. Chargers are surely regretting not hiring Brian Daboll, but neither here nor there. You mentioned last week's game. Staley typically runs zone coverage. He flipped to man coverage in the second half against the Chiefs. It worked. And then we heard Derwin James and Michael Davis effectively shit on the idea of playing zone last week. And after you watch film of the Bears offense last week, you just wonder if more man-to-man is the Chargers' defensive approach from the onset, rather than letting Tyler Bagent get comfortable against off coverage as he plays check down Charlie again. Now, I know Bagent came out this week. I can throw it too. I can throw it deep. So,
I saw him try and throw it deep, Payne, against the Minnesota Vikings. That made Chad Pennington look like he had a 110-mile-an-hour heater in his arsenal.
Chad Pennington, one of the most accurate quarterbacks I've ever seen. Pretty wild to see. But yes, he did not have the arm strength. So I think what's interesting here is I think the Chargers maybe had the wake-up call, right? Guys calling out the head coach. They make the adjustment at halftime against the Chiefs. They have a great defensive performance the second half against the Chiefs. Let's come out against Tyler Bagent, make him work a little bit. Don't let him settle in and get comfortable. Play more man coverage. Play tighter coverage. Then you think about the Chargers. The one area where they've improved a little bit this season is against the run. They're 8th in EPA per rush allowed, well above average in yards per rush allowed to running backs as well. So Bagent might not have the monstrous ground game support he had a week ago in his first start. To me, like, the Charger season's on the line here. This has to be a spot where the Chargers have to man the fuck up. And you start to look at the rest of the schedule. I understand it looks a little bit more difficult in the totality of the remaining schedule number because you face Buffalo and you face the Chiefs, but there's a lot of games, like 6 games in there, that are more than winnable. Your season starts now. If Brandon Staley can't come up with a game plan to stop this Bears offense, it is time to move on. He's got to be fired by the end of day Monday. And I usually don't do the hot take stuff. I don't usually call for people's jobs in advance, but that has to, if the Bears go out there and exceed offensive expectation against Brandon Staley, he's got to go. And I know Kellen Moore's offense isn't humming like he thought it was going to, but you got to move on from Brandon Staley if his defense does not show well here.
Also, I will say, and we're not going to touch on the other side of the ball, this is a significant step down in class for the Chargers offensive line in terms of a Bears team that doesn't have an elite pass rusher, can't truly generate pressure, that if you can't keep Justin Herbert from being under duress every single time he drops back like he has been against the Raiders, against the Chiefs, that is another major issue to try and address. So to your point, I think it's the Chargers' opportunity to go out there on a national stage and really make a statement against a Bears team whose stock has been rapidly climbing. I mean, we've seen the Bears put together good efforts before. I mean, this is a team, inching towards a level of respectability, getting healthier on the defensive side, but this will no doubt be a major test for that defense against a Chargers offense. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, you can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod if you haven't already done so. The college show been alive for 24 hours. A lot of the marquee matchups there. You can wait in the wings for Stay Green as the NASCAR season winds down. Only two races left in the season. That'll drop first thing Friday morning. But Payne, before all of our listeners have a chance to go through our full catalog of content, best bet now on a 1-game winning streak. Let's continue to get back to the win column. Where are we going this week in the National Football League?
What's the quote for Major League?
That's 1 win. Now that's 2. I believe 3 makes it a winning streak is what Lou Brown says as he's peeling layers of clothes off of the Cleveland Indians owner in that particular scene.
Yeah, this is something we kind of deliberated on, and it's certainly not the prettiest, but I feel like we are buying a team at the floor. Let's go with rotation number 268, the Green Bay Packers. We'll call it +1. I don't know where this heads from here, right? I think there's some interesting stuff there. Defensively, it would appear like the Packers are getting healthy. Jair Alexander returned to practice. Devondre Campbell returned to practice. He's their green dot. It would be great having those two back. I think they are trending that way. We got great news with Christian Watson. Saw a video of him at practice yesterday. Full go. Awesome to see. Aaron Jones, not so sure. I think that hamstring's given him a little bit of trouble. But really what this is about is buying the Packers at what I believe to be their absolute floor price. And you're kind of selling the Vikings. 1, it's a short week, so you got some narrative stuff there. 2, it's a dome team. It's going to be playing in some cold weather. It's going to be like high 30s at Lambeau Field. But you think about some of their wins, and I said this at the top. San Francisco is a positive 11% Monday night net success rate. CMC drops a ball. You get the miraculous touchdown, the momentum score before halftime with Jordan Addison that doesn't happen more than 5 times out of 100, and it's creating a little bit of a different perception on the Vikings. The other thing that's interesting here, you go back 2 weeks, go to Chicago, tons of sharp money on the Vikings, right? Initial money was on the Bears, but once it got down to 2.5, ended up closing 3. I didn't think Minnesota played overly well there. Required a defensive touchdown just to win the game by 6 against a Division II quarterback who played for 2 quarters in that game. So I start to look at the wins the Vikings have had the last 2 weeks. It's great. It saved their season, undoubtedly, but it's starting to kind of put them back into their early season price range. And I don't think that's the team that we'll have here on Sunday. So Packers +1. We also wanted to give out a second best bet. I know we did this back in week 1 where we had a side bet and then we had an accompanying teaser that we gave out a little bit earlier ahead of week 1. Let's go ahead and provide one of those as well as the second best bet. We broke down the Chargers game here. Let's use a 2-team 6-point teaser. Got to get it below the key number of 3. But the first leg, 278, Los Angeles Chargers -2.5, and we'll pair it with 280 Monday Night Football, Detroit Lions -2. Have to get that 2-team teaser below the key of 3 on both of those. So 2 best bets this week.
Does that mean I get Monday off for good behavior?
Probably should, just because, all our loyal listeners only listen to the Monday podcast when we give out something in advance. The kind of the casuals, the fly-by-night guys don't end up listening if you give out a pick for Monday Night Football ahead of Monday Night Football.
Well, at least we can do a truncated breakdown of the Raiders and Lions when we reconvene on Monday. But obviously, we'll be back with some of the observations that we saw during the NFL week that was, some look-ahead line adjustments, and, of course, the invaluable injury analysis that Deepak Shona provides for us every single Monday. Anything else you would like to share with our loyal Bet the Board listenership, kind sir?
No, I mean, just kind of doubling back to the Packers a little bit. I think the matchup is a little bit interesting here. Again, your hope is that they come out a little bit better, because you're looking at this delta between first half production and second half production, and it just makes little to no sense. And so if you can get the first half production even halfway near the second half production, finally you'll get like a full effort here from Green Bay. The other interesting thing is we know Brian Flores loves to blitz. Jordan Love, so far this season, has graded out better against the blitz than from a clean pocket. So very interesting dichotomy there. So I think we are getting some good value here on the Packers +1.
Always makes sense to buy low in the grand scheme of things. Other thing you're going to want to keep in mind for the Vikings as well, TJ Hawkinson dealt with a number of small lower body injuries, and I know it could be precautionary, but was also a DNP on Wednesday. If he can't go, that would obviously limit some of the things the Vikings were able to do in the passing game, especially if Jair Alexander and Devondre Campbell return for the Packers. Best of luck.
That'd be a nice little thing there, right? Hawk banged up, Jair back to kind of remove Addison. You still don't have Justin Jefferson. Like where are you going in the pass game at that point?
Makes things significantly more difficult. That is for damn sure. Best of luck with all of your NFL Week 8 investments. Like we said, we'll be back with you Monday morning to provide a shorter breakdown of the Lions and Raiders and recap everything that we saw in the week that was in the National Football League. And I guess Sunday afternoon, with a Green Bay Packers ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.